Hi, everyone. David Roldan. I lead our venture capital and startup business development for all of Europe for Google Cloud Platform, which effectively means that I spend my days working with our partners. Partners for us are VCs, angel investors, and trying to figure out how do we help support their portfolio companies. A lot of that is making sure that we can leverage our startup program as a mechanism to deliver a collection of services to the companies to help them as they're looking to scale and grow. But I guess before we get started, maybe wait another minute as people continue to kind of shuffle on in. Um, I'd say, one of the great things about the role that I have is that it's consistently working and talking to people that are on the cutting edge, that are building what's next. So it's an opportunity to consistently take a look at trends from a regional perspective to a global one. And if there's one thing that I've seen, it's that we live in a world where people have never had more choice than they do today. Means that there's a lot more to think about as people are looking to build their companies. So on one hand, it can bring a lot more complexity with the options and choices that they need to make. But on the other hand, I think it's fair to say that there's never been a better time for people as they're thinking about building what's next. The reality is that with the amount of technology that we have today, the barrier of entry to start a company has never been better. So it means that for people to ultimately go ahead and get started, they have this opportunity that has never existed before, at least not to this degree and to this level. It's also helped to create a more of a democratization of some of these technologies. I find it interesting and funny that a lot of people these days are talking about AI and machine learning and what's all the buzz and is it a phenomenon? The reality is, these are technologies that actually have existed for some time. It's just that now the technology's gotten good enough where the processing speeds can be equipped to help deliver some of these technologies. And we're starting to see a lot of these realizations in different products that people are building, not just ourselves, but a lot of people across the globe. So, hopefully, through today and with the conversation, it'll be a lot more about talking about what's that phenomenon really about. And as people are kind of trying to tackle data and figure out how are they taking that into consideration, into kind of building that fabric of what they're looking to achieve. Because at the end of the day, everyone's probably, to some degree, adopting something like lean startup methodology to figure out, how do they build a beautiful product? What are the inputs that they can have for that? But, as we kind of transition into this era where data is king and it matters in everything that you do, now you get people that, as if it wasn't already hard enough to try and figure out how do you kind of build, measure, learn, with data can really confuse things and get you into a point where that happens. And if you do that, then certainly that might happen as well. But I think now it's about then how do you take the next level? Where is kind of the web going in general? And I think now we've really entered into this world where it's much more about kind of the emotional intelligence, the emotional web. And it's there where you're starting to see a lot more about, how do we embed AI and machine learning into a lot of the products and into the fabric of what we're trying to accomplish. Because if we take this as fact, that, data is going to continue to grow at this rate, then it's trying to figure out how do you make sense of it. As a founder, a lot of people need to take a lot more things into consideration as they are thinking about what they're building. And there's a lot more inputs now, right? But I think what's great is that now you can go and think about, what you once knew, and we can take an example as, say, traditional kind of BI, as you're thinking about things and using those inputs and how it's changed. Because now you have all these kind of social media aspects. You have a lot of kind of, companies that say, hey, we're looking to collect a lot of data. How are you going to use it? Many people don't know. And I actually see quite often that a lot of people will say, I wish we would have started collecting this data a few years ago. And the amount of times that I've heard people talk about that is quite often. So I think certainly a recommendation would be around how do we leverage that, and then how do we think about it in terms of kind of where the world is going. This is just kind of talking about the evolution of the web, and kind of getting back on topic around the emotional web, around how to figure out how do you leverage and how do you build a lot of your product where you can consider a lot of the elements around kind of injecting AI into what you're building. And why? Because if you think about kind of what's happening, probably I'd say 7 out of 10 companies getting VC backed in Silicon Valley today have some element of AI or ML built in. And that's not just, again, some phenomena. That's part of where the world is going, and for good reason. At the end of the day, it's gonna be about those that are looking to find an edge, because generally most investors will say, what do you want for your companies? They just want them to have an edge. They don't give a shit what it is, but they want to make sure that it is an edge. And oftentimes it's trying to figure out what are some elements and areas of technology that can help produce that and help give you that. Oftentimes we'll get the question around, is this a kind of rise up of the machines? And actually it's not. It's actually going to be that kind of level of machines and humans kind of interacting much more together. If you think about kind of the evolution of things like speech to text and kind of the digital assistants that you see, that's just the beginning. It's going to be about trying to figure out how do you enrich lives? How do you transform the everyday experience and create one where it's going to be so connected that you'll have things where it's going to go beyond just things like virtual reality, but it's going to be much more about that kind of augmented reality and almost where it's going to be mixed reality. And I think that's really where the world's going in general. And this slide kind of talks about where that phenomena is, and a lot of what is happening. Obviously we've done quite a bit ourselves in trying to figure out how do we kind of inject a lot of that type of technology into our own solutions. But we're certainly not alone. But one of the challenges that I hear quite often with a lot of startups that are trying to figure out how do I get started, what are they building as it relates to AI and ML is around kind of the knowledge set. I'd probably estimate that there's probably less than 10,000 kind of AI, ML, machine learning professionals globally. So that's a real problem, and it's one that over time it'll improve. But when you have something that is so new, that is not new in the sense that trying to figure out how do we enhance what exists from a technology perspective and how do we use that to help it enrich lives, I think you'll see more of the ability of how you're going to be able to leverage some of the things that not just us, but other enterprise companies, other companies in general are looking at, and then be able to take a lot of those tools to be able to apply it to yourselves. With digital assistants and chatbots and things like that, I think that it's pretty awesome when you think about that. Pretty soon we're going to enter into an age where it doesn't matter necessarily what's on the other end of the line. It's going to be because the technology has improved so much that it's going to be able to do a lot more of predicting kind of what your requests may be, and trying to think about how to enhance that customer experience in that journey. And that'll only continue through as we look at kind of more and more where things are going to go. And we see that all the time with things like retail, and with more and more people in droves kind of going online, trying to figure out, how to make all their purchases. But I'm actually more interested in kind of things around, kind of just to go back a second, from a manufacturing standpoint. Quite often when people think of manufacturing, they think maybe that's the old guard, not traditionally inspiring. But I think there's actually a lot to be told and a lot to be said about how that industry is getting disrupted every day by people, and how they're looking to create some greater efficiencies. So if you take a look at this story here, where this is a cucumber farm in Japan, and it all started where you had someone that said, they wanted to help their family business, and they found that when they were there working and seeing just how tedious and how long a manual of a task it was to inspect every single cucumber to make sure that they were always consistently putting out the best product out there. Now, you might think, well, what's interesting about that? Well, the reality is that they decided that ultimately, the son, that is, decided, what if we were able to inject and use some computer vision to be able to take pictures of all the cucumbers and be able to have a much more streamlined and efficient process where we can then take a look and say, actually, we're going to cut down the amount of time that it takes to be able to identify what goes out into market in half. It was really, really phenomenal, and you can see a little bit of kind of the machine there, of what it was doing. But all that stuff is a form of deep learning. They leverage TensorFlow, which is, those of you not familiar, it's a machine learning library. It's open source, the most popular one on GitHub. But it's quite interesting that they were able to then be able to leverage something and harness the power of machine learning to be able to ultimately figure out how do they improve their own production lines of what they're doing for just their farm. So I think pretty remarkable. And this is just one example of many that are out there that exist. Financial services, in general, FinTech, I think is always really interesting because, one, you have a lot of these large kind of battleships, if you will, that exist. Your HSBCs and RBS and all that stuff, and consistently they're trying to figure out how do they gain a competitive edge, and you have a lot of people that are leveraging a lot of kind of fraud detection, where they're using that as a platform to be able to figure out how do they catch the bad guys. Right, and how do they get a lot of those kind of white collar criminals, if you will, where they're running a lot of algorithms to try and figure out how do they kind of improve kind of things from a compliance perspective, and you're starting to see a lot more of that through things like machine learning as well. So kind of. In closing, what I'd say for a lot of kind of startups in general is that because the rate of change and because of the world that we live in, today is much more about kind of your ability to not only be nimble, but it's also about how you're going to think about the products that you're building and how data will be at the core of it, and then how you're going to be able to think about maybe producing some elements of AI and machine learning. I'm not suggesting today, by any means, that everyone go and run out and start trying to figure out how to build a neural network. That's not how it works. In fact, most times, how things start out is it's an organic conversation around how do we want to improve the customer journey for the people that we're trying to reach? How are we trying to build an absolutely beautiful product that will resonate with people? And that will help us achieve product market fit. And a lot of that is going to be around thinking about, the little bits that are going to give you an edge. And a lot of it is going to be around thinking about technologies like this. So I'll kind of open it up for questions, and yeah. Okay. Well, if anyone wants to have a conversation offline, here today and tomorrow, and appreciate your time. Thank you.